Okay, greetings everyone, and welcome to the Elixir Festival. Thank you for joining us. It's an exciting time. Hello, guys. Some of you are familiar faces, others are new. Welcome, welcome, and also welcome to those that will meet with this broadcast in the future in our multi-dimensional world. The Elixir Festival, of course, is on the heels of my book launch, Return with the Elixir, which just occurred here in Bali over the weekend with Chakade Kurtiasa at the Kurtiasa ancestral home of Iba. It was a great success. It was wonderful after a 5-year odyssey of writing this book to share that with so many people. And now, on the heels of that launch, I'm excited to kick into the Elixir Festival with some of my mentors and friends and people I really admire and respect that I think have something to say. In the broader scene or perspective, what I was hoping for is a conversation about the future, since we're amidst such a grand scale collapse of civilization and rebirth or renewal. Sometimes I call it a reboot. This is the time to really get our energy right. This is the time to start asking very good questions. This is a time for redemption and to get the things that haven't worked out so well in our civilization, get them realigned, and so that we can lay the foundation for a long and prosperous future together. Now, we might not see that future, but we can be participants for future generations. We can make some sort of broad scale impact with what we do, say, and think now. So my hope is with people of Phil Cousineau's caliber, Robert Thurman, Andrew Harvey, Lynn Bell, Ian Baker, that we can have some sort of conversations which begin to prime us to think about the future. Many people, as you can tell yourself on occasion, possibly included, we can get frozen or paralyzed because of the decline of civilization. Somehow the impact of the day to day can very much hijack our nervous system. The propaganda is thick at the moment. The news medias are plugging in their fair share of toxic waste into our nervous system. And so I want to get away from all of that as much as possible. And I want to, as I say in the book, Return with Elixir, I'd like to go back in order to go forward. And so that includes astrology, that includes history, that includes poetry, that includes art, that includes subtle body science, and that includes philosophy. What can we glean from the ancient wisdom so that we can get very, very clear and very, very focused about the new world that's coming? With that in mind, I'd like to introduce today's guest, Phil Cousineau, who was very, very kind enough to offer me a very extensive afterword for the book. I hope that you've all you've all purchased your book, Return with Elixir, and there you'll see a very nice afterword by Phil. Phil is a wordsmith. He is one of the most erudite and sophisticated thinkers I've ever come across. He's the author of some 30 books. He publishes a book nearly every year. And on the leap years when he doesn't publish one, two more come in the pipeline. And that is a very terrifying thought for me after writing a book that took 5 years. I can't imagine cranking them out at that pace. But Phil is more than just an author. He's also a filmmaker. He's responsible for putting some incredible documentaries together. I also, want to just say that Phil is also an heir of Joseph Campbell, a direct student of Joseph Campbell. He was very kind to spend some time with me correcting some of my work on Campbell in the book. And he's also a pilgrimage guide. Together, Phil and I both lead tours based out of Sacred Earth Journeys with Helen Tomey, and his tours I'm very jealous of. One day I will join him. He's a guide for Greece and also Ireland, and probably other regions like France, where there are still bastions of sacred knowledge and mythology and poetry to share. So I know that Phil has spared us an hour of his time tonight, and in less than a week or so, he's off to Ireland. So we're very fortunate to catch him. His latest book is about Venus de Milo, and hopefully we'll get into his latest work too. I'm sure there's a lot of overlap. Phil actually wrote his latest book at my mom's house in Greece, and my mom was very, very happy, and called me regularly to tell me what an incredible human being Phil is. He apparently was writing the book on order of 12 hours a day. He was in a little hermit cabin on my mom's property overlooking 300-year olive oil orchards. 300-year olive trees and the expanse of Apalis Bay, and beyond that, the Ionian Sea, which I do write about in the Elixir. So, Phil, it's a great pleasure. Thank you for your time. I'm such a fan of yours, and I'm sure we'll get into some wonderful topics here. But how are you, and how are you doing, and where do you see the world as we stand right now?
Oh, first, welcome to everybody who's listening, apparently from all around the world. This is one of the glories of the modern moment, the way that we can reach out rather than just putting messages in a bottle and throwing them into the ocean and hoping somebody someday will read them. I am feeling fine. I'm in fit as an Irish fiddle, as my Irish friends say, because I'm full of myth again. I've just finished the Venus de Milo book, and I'm working on a book about the Odyssey, how the Odyssey can change your life. This is a book that has not been out of print for 2,750 years, roughly. So I've asked myself, why? What is this book telling us? And what is it has been telling us? What will it tell us? It's a wonderful way to get into myth, because this is one of my favorite definitions, which I got from my own mentor, Joe Campbell, with whom I worked for 8 years. In case people don't know, I wrote the film about his life, The Hero's Journey, and the subsequent book, and am responsible for good, bad, or indifferent reasons for bringing that phrase into the modern lexicon. And while working on the film and the book, Joe would often quote Solucius, a first century Roman writer, and his definition of myth, which is, I think, very pertinent for the modern moment. Myths are things that never happened, but are always happening. So that gets us away from the noxious idea that myths are lies, that they are untruths, or some kind of evidence from the pre-intellectual phase of the human race. Instead, it takes us to another favorite phrase of mine by the Greeks, with whom I share great love with you, Miles, and that is the notion that the myths help preserve the infinite moment. Isn't that a marvelous phrase? The infinite moment, birth, death, transformation, creation, apocalypse. When you read a myth, when you look at a mythic sculpture like I did for so many years with the Venus de Milo, or read an immortal poem, you are sensing history in amber. Something has been preserved, and I like to ask why. Because some bad things have been preserved, some evil things have been preserved, and those have to be left behind. What I am interested in, and have been since I was a boy, growing up in Detroit, in which, as the old phrase used to say, I grew up on the knee of Homer, because my family actually read books out loud together from the time I was 7 till about 14. Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, my father would pull out Moby Dick, Mark Twain, Homer, and we read books out loud. Each member of the family, for all 5 of us, we would each take a page. So this is not some affectation. These stories have been in me for a long, long time. And yet I don't accept them just without reservation. I constantly question them. So an early distinction, Miles, I think that would help, would be one that Joe himself, Campbell, in The Masks of God, it's a 4-book series that he published in the late 50s, early 60s. He made an enormously important distinction for me between primitive mythology, in which there are some things that are passed down in ritual, ceremony, belief, some form of the unconscious. You might explicate on that, Miles, and creative mythology. Some ancient myths hold us to ancient ways that are terrible for certain kinds of people, for women, for children, whatever it might be. Creative mythology is where I have lived all my life. In the world of poetry, storytelling, art, sculpture, music, it's what helps us capture the infinite moment. Remember, I also worked with Houston Smith, one of the great religious scholars of all time. He's arguably, his book, The World Religions, is arguably the biggest selling book on comparative religion, not just vaunting one over the other, but comparative religion of all time. Some 4 million copies. No one had ever done this before. No one had written about all the major religions and then some of the indigenous religions and looked for something in common. And while I worked with Houston for many years, including films about American Indians, He once said something that's pertinent to this afternoon's discussion, and that says, if it was true once, it is true now, and it will be true tomorrow. But getting to that point of what's finding what is eternally true, who was it? E.M. Forster called it the eternal moment. That's tricky. It's tricky because it's culturally influenced everywhere. And yeah, it's the job of poets like me, poets, filmmakers, depth psychologists like James Hillman, Jung, yourself, Miles. It's to get underneath the surface of things and down into the depths, which is where the juice of life is. That's what's kept me going all my life, both in books, but also films and music, trying to keep that alive and separate from pop culture. Pop culture distracts us from this wonderful idea of the infinite moment. When you come to face, when you embrace something that has always been true, why we don't know, and that's the subject of many PhDs. But embracing this, looking at Vermeer, listening to a Brahms concerto, seeing the beauty of a megalithic sculpture in Scotland, those moments that hold us fast. That's what I live for.
It's beautifully put, Phil. I want to ask the energy that you're bringing to it, the passion, let's call it. You have this intense passion, which, and I love this story of being raised on Homer's knee. I mean, I look at my two boys, and I would love to start something like that, reading a page each, or there's something very primitive, primal, noetic about it. It's beautiful. That was incredibly inspiring for me personally. But I want to ask, you have a lot of passion about reviving and maintaining and preserving this tradition. Do you have any thoughts about exactly how we could have almost nearly lost these traditions? What is it about culture? What is it about civilization? What is it about this time point where maybe most of us lost touch with myths? Why is it, would you say, that if you ask the ordinary person on the street if they are interested in myth, there's not much interest in myth. In fact, there's such a deep suspicion of myth. You have any comment about that from a sort of contextual point of view?
Well, many, many, many. This is so myriad-sided. It's so complex. Suffice it to say that this is an argument. It's a concern that actually goes back again to, excuse me, classical times, in which the early playwrights, Sophocles, Euripides, Aeschylus, they were already beginning to set the stage for the emergence of what we think of as philosophy in early Greece, which means what in ancient Greece? The love of wisdom. So the early playwrights are kind of the bridge to what became Greek philosophy and then European philosophy, Renaissance philosophy, which is the questioning. Constantly question what has come down to you. So you're not just repeating the errors of the generations. Well, they began to really wonder, are there gods up in Olympus that are determining the way you and I live? So already in ancient Greece, which I still love so much, they're asking, do we have free will or is everything predetermined? This is being sorted out, played with by the great playwrights who we are still watching and listening. And it's come down to us. This has been argued all through the Middle Ages in Europe and right to this day. I would argue that myths are still all around us. They have never left us. They've just taken different forms. The myths are in our music, they're in our art, they're in our philosophy, they are in our theology. As Freud and Jung knew in the 1890s and the early 1900s, the myths are there in our dreams. They have never left us. So all you have to do is ask, is there something repetitive in your life? Do you think about one thing or one person or one archetype over and over again? For example, beauty. Who doesn't think about beauty in the fashion world, but also in architecture, the beauty of physics, the beauty of law? It is there, but it tends to be renamed and called something else. If I ask you what your favorite movies are, This is something I actually do in Hollywood, which is might be hard to believe, but every year the studios, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, Pixar, Lucas, bring me down to Hollywood, show me a recent movie. It could be an old film noir, but it also could be Wonder Woman or Superman. And they ask, what's the myth here? Because Hollywood knows that there are certain archetypes that come back again and again and again, and they want to know why. Why are we moved by these or arguably manipulated by them? So that's one way to get into mythic content. If I talk to kids, which I often do, I'll give pro bono talks in junior highs, high school, and college. I'll say, what's your favorite movie of all time? What's your favorite song? What's your favorite sport? That is an entryway into the world of myth. When they begin to tell me their stories, then I'll say, well, okay, so you like wrestling, or running. Hercules won the first race of all times. That's one way to get into the myth of the Olympics. So it's all around us. We just rename it generation after generation. The question is, are we in charge of our own myth? Or what was the great question that I opened with in our movie on Campbell? We have Joe asking or quoting Carl Jung, in which Jung describes how he had a midlife crisis, actually a psychic breakdown, when he was around 50. And he went out to Bollingen, and that's when he began to make his own castle by hand, all by himself. And he said, I asked myself, am I living the myth of my life, or is the myth living me?
Yeah.
That is still a pertinent question.
I think that's stunning. It reminds me of a quote I came across writing Elixir when Jung says, where have all the gods on Mount Olympus disappeared to? And the answer he gave is that they've disappeared into the unconscious. But then he says this, and they now, because they're unconscious, now they appear as neuroses. So he was actually cautioning us. He was saying something about when the myth or this potency of time, this potency of archetype isn't conscious, that it actually can harm us. It can have some sort of negative consequence on us from the unconscious side of it. Can you speak to that? Because I think
Oh,
you're
yeah,
right there.
I
You're
love that
right there.
thought. Thank you for that remembrance. One of my other mentors, and good grief, I've been blessed with some of the greats of the 21st century, Joe Campbell, Houston Smith, and the Jungian analyst Robert Johnson. Maybe some of your listeners know him. He wrote He, She, and We, books about the psychology, the mythic psychology of love and romance. Hugely popular books. And his mentor was Jung himself. So this is one of these 6 degrees of separation business. I'm a kind of link to Joe Campbell for younger people. Robert was a link to Carl Jung. And Jung once told him that the hitchhiking on your point, as Angie Arian used to say, the undealt with myth in your life can become neurosis, including creativity. People who have blocked their own creativity become neurotic. And so one way, which is not pathological, of dealing with neurosis issues about the meaning or the lack of meaning in our lives is simply, I should have to couch that. Uh, it's not simple. It's simply complex, what physicists now call simplexity. Do you know that new word? Simplexity, simple complexity is if you're feeling a lack of meaning in your life, be more creative. Creativity is that seed in the soul that needs to be nurtured. Otherwise, we suffer from, for me, the great malaise of the modern world is a lack of meaning.
Yeah,
So
there it is. I think, this is where maybe the Elixir book that I'm writing has some intersection here, because basically the first chapter is, for me, was about understanding our world where we are right now. And in order to really make sense of the symptoms, one of them very well articulated by psychologist John Vervaeke in Canada, Toronto, he calls the meaning crisis. And I share with him a sensibility that in how do we understand how we got here, where we have a convergence of crisis, or what some are calling the poly crisis, where we have ecological devastation, we have an economic crisis that's like a deck of cards just ready to collapse. But we also have this widespread, the very least malaise, all the way down to existential dread, anxiety, and depression. He traces it all the way back to the Renaissance and even the Age of Reason, the Enlightenment period, which brings us very, very far forward in terms of technological development and logic, reason. But in a way, it atrophies the right brain, or what we call the right mode. Part of us that speaks the language of myth, speaks the language of archetypal symbolism, and has access to the unconscious. And so we're right now, situated in a time and place where we're at the tail end of being so left-brained that we're in a way starved. We don't have the nutrients or the vitality anymore. Some part of our being has been completely atrophied or shut down or shut off. So when you start this conversation with this kind of viva for life, I mean, you're an embodiment of someone who has maintained this integrity, and you're feeding off it, and that's what probably accounts for this tremendous output that you're capable of. And so, just take a moment to guide us through this this revival, if you will, of creativity. This, first of all, it comes in so many forms, but really what it is some sort of reclaiming process that all of us are capable of, that is necessary for real integral living.
Oh, beautiful setup. Thank you, Miles. Thank you. Two things. I believe one of the most important books of our time, or at least deeply important for me, was a late life book published just after Jung died in 1961 by his assistant for so many of those years, Aniela Jaffe, Jaffe, with an agu over the E. And it's called The Myth of Meaning, in which she's remembering numerous conversations with Jung and the crisis of meaning since World War II. And one of the things that she passes on that he said is so relevant to what we are suffering under, enduring under right now, which you've just explicated, is that every attempt at describing meaning is a myth. Every myth is an attempt to describe deep meaning. So if I ask you, when did you fall in love? And you begin to tell me when you met your wife and you had your kids and so on, you are beginning to describe what Sam Keen, the editor of Psychology Today for so many years, described as personal mythology. If someone tells you why they voted for so-and-so last fall and why they didn't vote for someone else, they will begin to tell you their meaning of modern life, good, bad, or indifferent. When we reach for deep, enduring meaning, we are becoming mythological. This is the numinous aspect of myth that I'm interested in, not the fallacious aspect of it, but what gets us closer to the numinous, which is a word I prefer to sacred nowadays. Numinous is an old Latin word that describes being at a sacred site and feeling the presence of the gods. Feeling the shiver go up your back, like the frisson that the French describe when you walk into Chartres Cathedral, or maybe at a Wang puppet performance in Bali, where you are living these days. When you are in the presence of the deep, real sacred thing, it's not just intellectual. Your body will vibrate like a tuning fork. That's the numinous, and that's what deep myth brings us towards. And it's what I try to evoke when I lead my tours for Helen and for Sacred Earth Journeys. I take people to Yeats's Tower, or Cuba, the birth of Cuban music. That's where I'll take you, where something numinous and eternal happens. Because if we feel like we're victims of pop culture or media, then we are living somebody else's lives. It means we are not taking more seriously the possibilities for transcendence, the possibilities of actual encounters with the numinous in our own lives. And I don't mean just in exotic places somewhere else. I live on Telegraph Hill in North Beach, in the heart of San Francisco. And every day I walk down the hill to one of my local cafes or bookstores or jazz joints, I am conscious of trying to find out what is sacred there. Why? I had a brief few minutes with the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh years ago at the Jung Institute, actually here in San Francisco. And I asked him about the virtues of pilgrimage, a sacred, transformative journey to a sacred place. And he looked at me and he was so kind and he said, "You know what, Phil? I love the work that you're doing, but what's truly important about pilgrimage is that it prepares you for returning home and experiencing the sacred in your own backyard." That's a wonderful virtue for the soul work that we're doing, Miles. For the pilgrimages that we experience or we help others with, it's to come back and realize our everyday encounters are also potentially sacred or numinous. Otherwise, we're what Joe Campbell once told me, "Oh, I trust those philosophers and those mystics until their feet leave the ground."
Mm. I don't know exactly what you said in there that triggered a an association um, while I was writing the book. And actually, I was in Ithaca at my mom's house, and I walked up to Homer's place. Have you ever walked up to Homer's place?
Many, many times. It's one of my sacred places. By the way, the reputed palace of Odysseus and Penelope, for those who haven't had the pleasure of being in Ithaca, it's magical.
I mean, what you're describing in terms of the numinous moment or the felt sense. I mean, I'm very fortunate to lead pilgrimages. It means that at least twice a year, I'm somewhere where something where you described like the shivers down your back. I mean, it's something that I've built into my life now. But I remember when I was in the writing process, I was up there at Homer's place with this glorious vista of Aphallis Bay. And of course, this is a ruin. This is a site where there's a ruin of a Hellenistic church, which is supposedly built on top of the Palace of Odysseus. And you could tell the difference in the hand-hewed stones. One, the newer one, very sort of more crude, and then the sort of megalithic stones underneath it. And I remember I described this in the book, and I just want to share it here because it fits right here, how pivotal. I had a intuition or inclination to pivot a course that I was teaching on Buddhism. It was a very sort of, very Buddhist course. It was supposed to be for 2 years, and all of a sudden I had this wash or wave that we really need to include Campbell and Jung in this course. And the sort of concept that came to me is we need to really live more mythologically, live a mythological life. And at the time, it was a new idea for me. Phil, you've been living this for a long time. Sometimes I wonder if you just take it for granted as how it is. But for most of us who have been, consumed in the reductionistic paradigm, the logic-based paradigm, for me, I felt it was so important, chiefly because I think, as Rick Tarnas describes the world has become so disenchanted. In other words, it's just building blocks, it's just billiard blocks, it's just confined spaces, it's just overload of data, it's just a tremendous amount of pressure, psychic pressure in reasoning our way through complexity. And there's something about the lack of vitality and also the ability to create meaning, which requires a different kind of language set. And when I look at Jung and when I look at Campbell, even as orators, even as presenters, and I see this in you too, Phil, your ability to use language just takes my mind in a completely new worlds. Like the actual use of your words and your lexicon, your breadth of different knowledge sets. And Campbell was the same. When I look at recordings of Campbell, I mean, it's his ability to take the imagination to new vistas just through language is incredible. And what happens on that journey is something gets activated or revitalized. And what Thich Nhat Hanh said to you, I think, is really important. It's not just about going on the pilgrimage. It's also coming back to ordinary life, to your work life, to your family, to the day to day, and finding new meaning there, finding a new layer, a new way to see it, a new way to architect it, a new way to soulscape it. In other words, it's not just dead stars. Rick Tarnas is talking about the cosmology above us as having a story to tell us. And that could just be an invitation to the world, your living room around you, your cubicle at your corporate job, or whatever it is that you do. It has a story that's pregnant within it if you have eyes to see it and words to read through it. Do you have anything to say about that?
Oh, do I? Thank you for so many kind words. Thank you. I am trying to pass that on, the virtue of knowing our story, the virtue of knowing and honoring the language that has come down to us, the language we choose to express ourselves and to communicate with each other. Speaking of Rick, he just came to a book signing of mine with the cosmologist Brian Swim, in which we're trying to connect the beauty, the glory of the actual origins of the universe with everyday life. So this is very much on my mind. And one way, perhaps to advance even to a second, to something I know you want to talk about, and that's practical application of this, little tips. Here's one simple one, which I got from, for me, the most beautiful prose writer about mythology. If any of your listeners, your followers want to pursue this, Robert Colasso was a legendary publisher in Italy and one of the most beautiful writers about myth from India to Greece in our time. And in his book about Greek myth, especially, he has a kind of musical refrain that's always in italics that he repeats through the entire book, in which he asks, when did it all begin? That question puts you into sacred time. It puts you into myth time. It's a way to every day adjust yourself from the acceleration of modern life that does not want you to actually live in the present as much as Buddhists want us to. Does not want you there. It wants you in the future so you are completely disoriented. But the mythic state of mind says, if I'm on Ithaca in your mom's house, or if I'm in North Beach here in San Francisco, when did it all begin? And I turn around and I'm standing in front of the house where Allen Ginsberg wrote Howl. When did it all begin? I'm on a street corner, knowing that Mark Twain and Robert Louis Stevenson actually lived here and wrote some of their great books 100 years ago. That moment, which you can do in your own neighborhood, in the neighborhood that you grew up in, wherever that might be, or when you're traveling, it does one of these. It brings you back to mythic time, and mythic time will give your soul some solace. Just to feel, as I did once, to be in a room with Ray Charles and ask, when did soul music begin, Ray? And I'm getting it from the horse's mouth, as they used to say. Well, it was one night in a bar in Kansas City when I realized that all I had to do was bring gospel and rhythm and blues together, and boom, there is the origin of soul music. It can be a question of somebody. When did you begin? When did you know what you wanted to do with your life? If you do that with a friend at a coffee shop, you are moving this out of that acceleration, that tremendous tectonic force that does not want us to be present. And it takes you down into mythic time. Something people can do every day. And I do that here in San Francisco, or if I'm in Dublin, or if I'm in Athens, I will stop, take a breath, which is a good Buddhist move, right? And say, what happened here? Or as Ben Bradley famously or infamously said, when Woodward and Bernstein brought in the first draft of the story that broke the news about Watergate, that's all great, guys, but where's the story? It's a famous quote in the history of journalism now. I recommend that people who are traveling or even at home do that once a day. If you do that once a day, it will change your life. What's the story here that takes you down, Miles, into soul?
So briefly, because you've mentioned it a couple of times, can you define mythic time for us?
Mythic time is where things began and where it can still be accessed now in music, poetry, dance, sculpture. You know, Tom Stoppard just so we're not constantly in the past, one of our great playwrights today writes in a beautiful commentary about one of his more important plays. He says, he has one of his characters say, actually, what happens in the moment between the flame, the fire going off in the human imagination, and then the actual movement of the poet's pen? He says, in that movement, because not everybody responds to an idea or an inspiration. Some people say, well, I'll get back to it tomorrow. Or, oh, that's stupid. Or, no, people have already done that. But the artist, who I think is a living mythic personality, the artist says, I cannot wait. I will move. And in that moment of movement is the hope of the world. The hope that we will actually respond to the urgency of the day, which I know you're so deeply concerned about now. I think the mythic plays, mythic art, standing in front of a Rembrandt, watching an Arthur Miller play, insists that you, the viewer, respond to it. Otherwise, it's sheer entertainment.
I mean, that's really it strikes at the heart of my hope for this series, Phil, right there, I think. And maybe it's a good segue because one of the things I really wanted to do practically with you on this call was to talk about rewriting our cultural story. And so now we have various elements, the passion and mythic time and the noetic moment, and the fact that it's ever present, it's always available. And then this little thing that you just mentioned here, I think is so beautiful, which in the Buddhist side of things, we might call altruistic engagement. I mean, it's the person that has enough confidence or dignity, let's say, that allows that noetic moment to move through them and doesn't curtail it or avert it or judge it or cut it off, but allows it to move through you. But so let's see if we can put some of these elements together, practically speaking. First, what I want to do is I want to give a shot, try to give a shot at our current collective narrative. And then I want to talk and turn it over to you to help us see how we can participate in the rewriting of the new narrative. And one of my impetuses here is that I think we need a new story. We're at a critical crossroads, and I think it's time for a different kind of story. We're at a crossroads and in a couple of different ways that I talk about in the book, but certainly there's a paradigm shift away from simply being logical and reasonable. This is a time of integration. We will see science and spirit together. We will see reason and intuition married together. We will see masculine and feminine attributes come together. So there's that part of it. And there's also the Aquarian age that is being birthed out of the decline of the Piscean age. And there's new archetypes, which, either next week or the week after, Lynn Bell, an astrologer, very astute astrologer, will come in and talk about. But in terms of this idea of writing a new story, one of the stories that I think we've been, this reverts back to this idea that the gods that once were up on top of the mountain have not disappeared. They've actually gone subterranean in our own unconscious. And then you said we are always beholden to these archetypes. And I would say we're always participating in the writing of the myth. We're just not aware of it. And so one way I've looked at the myth that we're currently living by has to do with Nietzsche's proclamation that God is dead. And from there, this idea that and as I've mentioned with Rick Tarnas, that the world has become disenchanted. And then once you have what the collapse of what Bob Thurman calls a multiverse or a multi-life existence, and then you just have one life to live, and that at that critical moment where the electricity in your heart and brain stop, everything ceases. Which is the quintessential sort of idea of modern materialistic paradigm, that we really just have one life to live. There really isn't any meaning. You better go out and get yours now, eat, drink, and forever be merry, for tomorrow you die kind of idea. This then if we consider that as the sort of unconscious script, unconscious narrative, it then starts to account for how we live. We are consumers. We live on a planet of finite resources, but we're ever just consuming and gobbling. And and from there, we can see that the vast consequences on our economies, on the planet, on the ecological system, and on our relations with others, including our own bodies, has been severely, severely dismembered. And so I think that is a cultural myth. I think that's the cultural narrative. I think that's the main cultural story that is reverberating back into our own lives and making us feel this meaning crisis, this ecological crisis, this crisis of spirit. If we're right there, we have 15 minutes with one of the leading mythologists. Help us rewrite the story. What are the essential ingredients that we need? We've already covered them, but put them together for us.
Thank you. That was beautifully delivered. Thank you for that setup. And I ask for your indulgence to begin with a story, then answer those ideas because this is so relevant. I was asked to deliver a commencement speech at a local high school 3 or 4 years ago up in Marin and north of San Francisco. And I went through the usual, find something that you love, follow your bliss, as Joe told me, but what he really said was follow your enthusiasm. Bliss came later. Follow your deep excitement, your enthusiasm. So I went through all that, and I asked the students to thank their parents for sending them to school and thank your teachers and so on. And as I was about to finish, I had this sudden inclination to add one more thing. And it's something that I had learned from one of my literary heroes, Albert Camus, who wrote beautifully on the myth of Sisyphus, which is I then did. And one of my earlier books is The Lost Notebooks of Sisyphus, in which he said, besides all of the pain and the struggle, we must think of Sisyphus as happy. It's a breakthrough line. It's now t-shirts. Young kids and teenagers and 20-somethings get that tattooed on their bodies now. That line is somehow burning its way into this current generation. But he also said something else. And that is, he asked his readers and his listeners, so we're talking the late 40s, early 50s, right after World War II, to be engagé. It's a beautiful French verb, which means engaged. Participate in the world. Don't be above it as a holier than thou mystic or a holier than thou poet, or as we say here in the Bay Area, holier, Berkeleyer than thou, right? Instead, find one cause that you burn for, that you believe in. And as I'm saying this, I'm looking out at this to 100 wonderful teenage kids, and they're looking at me with love in their eyes, Miles, because no one has really been telling them to follow their heart. They would say, oh, now study this, go to college to get this job and make this amount of money. But I was asking them to be engagé. Find a cause you deeply believe in, and then the rest will follow. You will find your career, your goal in life, and so on. I'm finishing up, round of applause, and a father who had been filming comes up to me, puts his camera down, and in a deep French accent says, oh la la, voila, I can't believe an American knows our great French philosopher Camus. And he kisses me on both cheeks. People are taking photographs of this. What the point of this is, I affirm something that people young and old want to hear right now. Be engaged. Participate in the mystery. Not just participate in politics. Participate in the great mystery of life. And that means both the glorious, follow your heart. What is your destiny? But also the world is in a hurting way. This is what I learned when I've been interviewing soldiers in some of my documentary films, where we are in a world of hurt. Isn't that an incredible phrase? That's what soldiers describe their pain as when they return from war. Oh, Phil, Mr. Cousineau, we are in a world of hurt. We have to own that. What was the title of James Hillman's most popular book, actually? We've had 100 years of psychotherapy and the world is getting worse. So this is something I suggest to people. Find your destiny. What are you destined to do? but also, and this is how I ended my talk with the kids, what kind of contribution can you make? It's not just going out there to make some money or fulfilling your own personal dream. How can I contribute? This is one of my morning practices, Miles. Ask, who can I help today? How can I contribute? I've got this, that, and the other to do. I've got a book to finish. I've got a lecture to give. That's not it. How can I contribute in my neighborhood with my family? Is there someone elderly or young that I can help? This is actually leads me then to maybe the closing line here that is so helpful to me. Joe, as in Campbell, used to quote Claude Lévi-Strauss, the great French anthropologist, and a phrase that he came up with when he was studying ritual and ceremony in South America and then comparing it with ritual and ceremony in Europe. This is a way to find out where myth is relevant, right? And he coined this phrase, the participation mystique. It's a fancy way of saying there is a mystery in actually participating in deep ritual and ceremony. And if you do that, you are, as Ram Dass and others in the 60s would have said, you are finally one with the universe, but you can't just be looking at it and analyzing it. So I ask people, your listeners, your followers, your readers, for your marvelous new book, are you engaged? Are you engagé? Are you actually participating in a mystery? And if not, you're on the outside looking in. You
Mm.
know, jazz players have this great phrase, either you're inside the inside or you're outside the inside. That's a great phrase for psychotherapists too, right? You're either in rhythm or you're out of rhythm. One way to get in
I
rhythm,
want to
this,
interrupt. I'd like to interrupt and just play devil's advocate with you, Phil,
yeah,
while I still have some time with you. Okay.
sure, sure, sure.
I'm with you to a point, but I want to nuance it and ask you this. It is possible to have the old worldview, old script, or unconscious mythology at the base and still be active and still be engaged. And I'll give you an example.
Sure.
I mean, you can believe that we're in a climate crisis, or you can believe that we live in a completely unjust world, and you can be acting on the grounds of social justice or on climate. Like a climate catastrophe could be your calling card. But as a psychologist, what I've seen time and time again is sometimes the activity reinforces the terror narrative. And so, and what I mean by that is it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy because you're so afraid or you're so angry or you feel it's so unjust or you feel it's so dire. And you marshal all you recruit all your passion and your energy to invest in a counter move, unknowingly reinforcing the very dire narrative. And that's what I'm very, very scared of. And that's what I critique. And I get a lot of flack for it because people hear what they hear me saying is, don't do that. What I'm actually saying is, and I look at, so, and then the alternative is I look at my master like Geshe Tenzin Zopo or the Dalai Lama. They're not saying there's no climate crisis, but they're not out there beating their chest and crying and wailing and condemning and pointing fingers either. And that's very important. What I see in my masters are people who see the world from a buoyant, exceptionally, they live from the point of view of endless possibilities. They don't live from the point of view of being cornered in a straitjacket on the precipice of falling into an abyss. And that is the new narrative that I want to help people recognize is available to them. And that's the perfect underpinning for the enthusiasm and for the engagement that you're talking about. And so I want to put that back to you. That little shift there, I think, is really critical.
So what do you substitute that with? What do you suggest to people who don't want to be diminished?
I mean, before engagement, I'd like to ask people to look at themselves first, to instead of before you go out, go in. Okay, because the origin story of all the trauma that we project out on the world actually is personal. And if you don't take care of that, you can just be unconsciously reenacting the old myth. even if it is for a valid cause. And so I think what you have to do is you have to take two movements. And I talk about these two movements in the book. And of course, those movements are reflective in astrology as we go back into time before we go forward. They're in Jung because we have to go within before we go without. They're in Campbell because the movement is out and back again. So I suggest that before, if people are beating their chests for virtue or for justice, for example, for whatever the cause might be, but they're burning on negative energy because there's still a lot of hostility and resentment and division, then it's really up to them first to take ownership of the source origin of the fuel that they're driving off of and do some inner work. There needs to be some healing first. And it's in that alchemical movement that they also understand, like, I'm not in a corner, and it doesn't have to be desperation. Actually, desperation, the energy or the movement out of desperation can be counterproductive. And so I think healing, what healing does is it creates space and room, and it transmutes that hostility or that resentment. It Compassion is the better energy. Love is the better energy. Possibility or inspiration is the better energy. And so, I mean, that's what is exhibited by my teachers. They may still be saying there are problems out there, but they're not snared in them. And therefore, their message comes across as a delight on the ears where no one is alienated.
Right. Well, yeah, I agree with all of that. One of my common themes in my work on creativity, writing, filmmaking, mythology, and pilgrimage is the overlap. You know, there's this wonderful line by Novalis, the great romantic German poet, who said, "The soul is there where the inner and the outer world overlap." So I like to ask people, have you found that overlap yet? Where your inner work finds some overlap with the work that needs to be done in the outer world. That's the sweet spot. So you're not trying to change the world before you have dealt with your own issues, and vice versa. That seems to help people a great deal. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And I really feel like that's an important, starting point.
Yeah.
Because I think too often with the crisis, the poly crisis that we're observing there, I do see a lot of rush to engagement. I do. But I also feel that there's some sort of undermining or at least self-fulfilling prophecy that's possible out of that if we're not careful. And I think Jung gave a lot of caution about that kind of thing.
Well, remember, I'm also giving this talk to high schoolers for whom we well know now, to our distress, in which it's not just apathy, it's utter despair with so many young people. Can I possibly make a difference in this world? So it's a limited offer. What I'm suggesting to them, find a way to engage, but of course, come back and then deal with your own. A metaphor for this that I use in all my pilgrimage work, for example, is realizing the difference between tourism and pilgrimage. And one way to think about it is the aggressive language in travel. This has great psychological implications. In travel, we talk about taking a photograph, taking a trip, taking home, taking a souvenir. On the take is a way that many people who are at home think about tourists. They're only on the take. They don't care about us. They don't care about the economy and so on. But in my cross-cultural study of travel, the history of travel, especially pilgrimage, is that no pilgrim leaves without a gift. The gift can just be a story. It can be something from home. It could be a postcard or a t-shirt. But thinking about giving versus taking is a wonderful and practical way to have a turnaround in your mind as you're moving around the world. It's also a way to think about our own creative potentials. So rather than me just finishing a book and producing what I hate to hear from my publishers, "Oh, Phil, we love your product." That's a world that just makes my soul shrivel, right? It's not product, it's a work of art, right? So instead, I like to think of this without any ego involved, that a work of art, that something that we have produced, that we have created out of heart and soul, is a gift to the world. A conversation, an offer to meet with someone over coffee. These are gifts, and it's a constant reorientation of our mind into what? Gratitude.
Yeah, that reminds me of the not to give it away, but at the conclusion of my book, the we make a pilgrimage in Java to the Borobudur, which I'm sure you visited. Have you visited?
Sure.
And the Borobudur, unbeknownst to me on my first visit, I didn't because it's so ornate and so intricate that I didn't notice that the top crown, which is called the chatra, it's kind of the center spire, is missing on the Borobudur. I didn't realize that. Anyway, the book goes through a whole mythic encounter with the archetype of the broken chatra. And in my discussions with my teacher Geshe Tenzin Zopa, we decided that we would do a group ceremony. So we're on pilgrimage doing exactly what you're saying. We're there to give something. And what we're giving is an energetic vision of the completion of the chatra, because of course, another symbol of the Borobudur is that it's a mandala, and Jung would have just been out of his mind with this the biggest mandala on the planet. But yet, and here's where the mythic story comes in, the greatest mandala on the planet is rendered inert because it's broken. And that's where we are as a civilization. There's something missing inside of us that renders us inert or pathetic or depressed or powerless. And Geshe Tenzin Zopa and Monko Jitu, the local Javanese masters that I were working with, they hatched this plan or conceived this plan that we weren't going to go around try to find bricks to reconstruct the actual physical object. What we were going to do was we were going to pray, visualize, and join the vibration of our own mantras to conceive visually the chatra as complete. And I came away from that story in the macro version of it, and particularly with my request to you as how do we rewrite a story? What I learned from Geshe Tenzin Zopa was first you have to envision a complete world that you're already whole. You can't reconstruct the chatra from the point of view that you're broken. First, you have to remember that you're always whole. You're already whole. It's already complete. You can't run around finding bricks and cement and sort of, feverishly hatch the completion of this physical structure. First, you have to tap the noetic. First, you have to tap the mythic. First, you have to tap this better version of yourself, this better story that you tell yourself that you're actually already whole. Then you can go about healing your wounds or, healing the division, if it were, whatever it is out there that may feel that it's fragmented or disrupted or disturbed. First, you find the better story in you that things are okay. And then you live from that place and you reconstruct from that place and you engage from that place. And so I think this is what you're pointing to. I want to turn it back over to you for any final thoughts because you've spent almost an hour with us, and I really appreciate all your time and your insights and your passion. Any concluding thoughts that you might have?
Yes, I keep ruminating over your question, which is one of the great questions of the day. How do we rewrite the story? One way to think about it is that the story that got us here, speaking as Americans, speaking as the Western myth of the individual, which gave us democracy in Greece, Renaissance art in Europe, the greatest series of inventions here in America is the myth of the individual. Who am I among the masses? Am I unique? Yes, I am unique, we shout out. I'm not like the the masses. It has produced some of the greatest singular and individual works of art and science in the world. It's also made us, and now I'm speaking specifically as Americans, as arguably the loneliest people in history. We are accomplished, we are bountifully rich, but we are also suffering from a great wound of loneliness, which means a world in which meaning is up in the air. We don't know what our lives are amounting to. But there is a way to rewrite that. I think that's what poets, filmmakers, musicians, the great scientists like Brian Swim, whom I just worked with, Rick Tarnas, Thomas Berry, the eco-theologian, as he described himself, we're trying to do, encourage each other to rewrite that story of the lonely individual that finally reconnects with the land, with the family, with the stories that went before us, to ease our loneliness. What's an immortal line by James Baldwin, the great James Baldwin, who once said, I'm paraphrasing now, you think you are deadly alone, semicolon, one of the great uses of the semicolon in literature. Then you read. Reading as one of the great sources of solace that says, wait, someone else's heart has been broken. Someone else felt that they were unrecognized in their time and in their area. And then you read the immortal books. You see a great movie or listen to great art or listen to a great orator like Martin Luther King. You realize if you are listening and paying sacred attention, you're not as alone as you thought you were. But now the next move. The next move then is to rewrite your story as a victim and rewrite it as someone who is now connected to the earth, to the universe, to the people who went before and the people who are coming after us. In that reconnection, we will revitalize our lives and we will know what our meaning is.
That's a beautiful conclusion, Phil. Thank you so much. I want to just turn it over. If there's one or two questions, you have time for one question. If there are anybody out there who'd like to ask Phil a question or myself or have a comment about the dialogue, please, now's the time. Otherwise, we'll close up the mandala until next week. Anybody? Is there anyone out there? Okay.
They can always send me a question or a comment. You can find me on my website. Thank you all
Well,
for listening, by the way.
we never got into Venus the Milo. Do you want to just plug your new book and where people can find your work, Phil?
Well, thank you for the reminder. Yes. Excuse me. It's a book I began the night of 9/11. I was flying into New York, arriving on the night of September 10th, 2001, arrived at LaGuardia as the first plane was hitting the first tower. Came down into utter hell. We thought this is one of those, this is apocalypse itself. This is the world ending. This is a mythic moment, Miles. And I was able to get out with my luggage. I was able to get out, find a small hotel. My publisher sent a car. And the reason it was important was because the first reading for the national tour of my book, Once and Future Myths, The Power of Myth in the Modern World, was going to be held at the Rizzolis in the bottom floor of the Twin Towers. So this was important for me. Many people back here in California thought I was in the Twin Towers when they fell. Talk about mythic. I couldn't, because all the cell phone coverage had died. There's no way for me to reach anybody. Talk about the power of silence, mythic silence, the interstitial areas between time and space and so on. The next day I was utterly bereft because as the realization of the loss of life, the terror, the belief that there were 7 more planes in the area, so this wasn't over. How did I respond? This is actually pertinent to our conversation today. I met with my publisher briefly. He encouraged me to keep going across America, and I held 21 town halls in 21 cities across America so that we could talk as a group, as a community, as a family about what had just happened in America mythically. Not just get caught up religiously or politically, but mythically. Full houses all across the country, Miles. When we agreed on that, I then the next morning walked across New York from where I was to MoMA so that I could do what? So that I could spend a couple of hours with Vermeer. There was something in me that I think was mythic, that has happened with people throughout human history, when in moments of utter terror, being bereft of hope and meaning, we have turned to art, music, storytelling, and conversation. So I walked, what was it, 5 or 6 miles across New York, spent an entire afternoon with the Vermeers, somehow replenishing. This is an important word in psychotherapy, but also in art. Can you revitalize? Can you replenish? Can you remember in every sense of that word? Art has traditionally gotten us there. It was there at MoMA that I decided to write about the history of the Venus de Milo, because my father used to subscribe to Life magazine. And one day in 1963, a Life magazine arrived with the Venus de Milo on the cover. And with tremendous meaning and passion, he said, "Philip, come downstairs with me." He took the cover off of the magazine, he framed it and put the Venus de Milo above his workbench in the basement. Why? I asked him years later, a month before he died, and he said, "I wanted you never to forget what is beautiful in life." So there in MoMA, I decided to devote as many years as it would take for me to write a book about why a single statue would mean that much to my father, but also
Mm.
much of the art world. Why does art move us? Why do we need to be moved? And where are we moved when we move?
Mm.
So my book, Who Stole the Arms of the Venus de Milo, is out now. I'm proud to say the governor of Milos itself is reading the book at the moment. That's a victory for all of us who write, right, Miles?
Amazing.
Thank
That's
you.
a really compelling story, and so I mean I think so beautifully captures and summarizes everything we talked about today. So thank you for your work on the book itself, and for being such a great guest for my mom while you wrote it. But also today was just it was revitalizing, Phil, to see you animated just like Joseph Campbell, and just all the beautiful contributions that you make, the tours that you lead, the books that you write, and the beauty that you put out in the world. So thank you for joining us on this. And I think, we'll build on this as we go through the lectures, because each speaker will be contributing a particular kind of discipline, but they all converge in a tapestry. I mean, the rewriting of myth, the astrology that's coming, the subtle body science that Bob will talk about, the pilgrimage that Ian Baker will talk about, the mysticism that Andrew Harvey will talk about. By the end of this series, I think we'll have a very, very rich perspective, and most importantly, that enthusiasm coming from a very good aligned vision or new story. I think that's a great, great omen to set us on embark on this elixir journey. So thank you so much, Phil.
Thank you for offering the elixir to the rest of us.
And safe travels in Ireland. And I hope to one day connect with you and Ithaca personally. Let's have a cup of coffee together at my mom's house.
Look forward to it.
Thank you,
Blessings in all your
everybody.
travels, everybody.
Pay attention to the emails, because each of these lectures will be coming at a slightly different time. And so, if you want to join us live, just make sure that you pay attention to the speaker, the day, and the time that we'll be converging together. So, wish you all the best for the week, and look forward to seeing you all very soon. Take good care. Thank you.